Welcome to Count Us In, showing up for the census right now, presented by the San Francisco Urban Film Fest and the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. This is a virtual conversation about the importance of the census for San Francisco and the Bay Area. Despite the contentious history of the census, it remains a critical tool for local and national change. The conversation will unpack how census participation connects to the urgent matters at hand, the census violence and oppression of the Black community, and the necessary dismantling of a police force that perpetuates the inequities of our nation. This conversation will also center the power of the census in supporting political representation, public resource allocation, identifying and counting communities, and how the census addresses police brutality. We have a fantastic group of panelists for this discussion today, and they are Del Seymour, founder of Code Tenderloin, Tyra Fennell, the CEO of Imprint City, Robert Clinton, citywide census project manager for the San Francisco Office of Civic Engagement and Immigration Affairs, and I'm Ronald Sundstrom, professor of philosophy and African American studies at the University of San Francisco and the humanities advisor for the San Francisco Urban Film Festival. An obvious obstacle that we're all facing in our individual lives, and I'm sure your organization is facing as well, is the current COVID crisis. So how is the current crisis around COVID affecting your work? Del.
COVID has completely transformed the mission and the duties of Code Tenderloin, where we have always been very deeply involved in workforce development, getting our people from one position to another, getting them involved in the trades and in the tech community. We have gone now to almost 80% COVID instructions, resources, and protection. We now have almost 35 ambassadors on the streets every day, teaching people how to use masks, teaching people what shelter in place means in a crazy tent encampment community where shelter in place and social distance is impossible. But we're working to make that impossible possible. You know, the unfortunate part of this pandemic, or just a situation it hit, and it closes all of our places where people can go in and sit down and use a computer, close out our libraries, our tech centers, where people would have had that chance. That's what we've been working on all spring, is to get it set up so we'll be able to do it right now. And now that's all blown. So now we're going to a completely different strategy, which we don't even know what that strategy is yet.
Our whole program for the census centered on bringing the census to the people, making sure that the questionnaire was accessible, especially because this is the first time that it's primarily digital. So the federal government expected most folks to be able to go online and do the census, and we know that that's just not the case here in San Francisco. It's really hindered our ability to kind of do some of the face-to-face in-person outreach that we were hoping to do. But also COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of the census, because it's more important than ever that we get the resources that we need. You know, we're about to go into this major economic crisis. We're seeing more people than ever rely on public benefits. We get funding for some of those public benefits based on our census population data. We're trying to do everything that we can to make sure people get counted in the absence of doing some of that in-person work that we had hoped to.
So my purview is specifically the arts, which is visual and performing. Visual artists, more or less, that work in the mural medium, they can kind of function as they were, because they could do self-distancing naturally and masks because they're outdoors. It's the performing artists that concern me the most. One, they get their livelihood from obviously engaging large crowds. And a lot of times artists struggle. They live from gig to gig. And we're looking at an abrupt end to revenue for the foreseen future. We don't want to create a space where artists have to go underground and create these speakeasies where large gatherings happen off the grid, which obviously can jeopardize the progress around COVID-19. So what Imprint City is doing is transferring our festivals and online and music events to an online platform. Imprint City and I also ask other arts organizations to use as much of their resources as possible to keep the artists they had lined up for gigs working. We don't want to create an underground movement where artists are doing underground events because they're trying to survive.
COVID-19 isn't the only crisis right now, the only thing that's going on in the streets. So obviously I'm referring to, of course, the protest going on right now. How does your census work for all three of you, right? Connect with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Robert, you're with the city office. So, this is a particularly tender question, but how does your work connect with the issues highlighted by BLM?
But the census is important for the Black Lives Matter movement in part because it gives us the data that we need to support the demands that we're making for equality. Black Lives Matters is all about addressing structural and systematic racism. And the census can give us some data that can substantiate some of the claims that we're making about gentrification, about how people of color die younger than white people, about how people of color sometimes aren't able to own their own homes and have to rely on renting. Especially in San Francisco, the census gives us the data to talk about displacement, which I think is really important. And there are so many people in denial about the problem that using census data as a tool, as part of the broader conversation to really advocate for the needs of Black people in particular, is one of the reasons why it's so important to make sure that everyone gets counted.
A lot of my work has been involving artists in certain symbolic gestures, such as the Black Lives Matter sign that you see on Fulton Street in San Francisco between Webster and Laguna, in partnership with the African American Art and Culture Complex and Bay Area Mural Arts Program. That was a wonderful community process. We involved the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association. We talked to residents. We had youth groups come out and help support that. So that was a really great start. But what we want to continue as an arts collaborative is, how do we get our artists to become registered businesses so they can benefit from some COVID relief funds, for example? How do we organize our artists so they're aware of opportunities in our city government, no matter how small they become after we deal with our budget shortfall, to benefit from the resources so they can survive this really murky period? Black and urban art spaces are getting together to see how we can marry the symbolic gesture with tangibles that can really impact the Black arts community.
I think about the census in the context of broader civic engagement work that my office seeks to do. We know that people of color and Black people in particular are sometimes very apathetic. We all know people who don't believe that voting is important. We all know people who don't believe that the census is important. And I've encountered so many people who don't even know what the census is.
How do you overcome in your work with your in the Tenderloin or in the Bayview Hunters Point, right, to deal with the lack of trust that lingers within the Black community in San Francisco?
Well, it's a heavy lift because we're talking about, frankly, centuries of disappointment from government and officials in the Black community. But I think a good start is the amount of outreach investment that was made in the census this round, specifically in community-based organizations that have trust within each specific community. And that's just not the Black community, across the board. Democratic clubs and other avenues of that sort are very crucial in educating populations that are not engaged on how the processes that inform our legislation works.
People in the Tenderloin, we're a very unique community. A lot of us are ex-offenders, including myself, who've been lied to. We've had the DAs say, well, just cop out to this and you can go home today, not knowing that was cop out's going to last you for the rest of your life. So we're real bitter against society. The man, as we say, I mean, you younger folks don't use that term, but older folks like me, we use the term the man. The man is the police, the fire department, the mayor, the president, everyone. All of you all are the man. I don't necessarily mean you're not the man. You're an exception. But most of you guys are the man. So we do not trust the man. Haven't, don't, and never will, because of inequities that the man has done. So laterally, I'm working on the testing sites for African Americans in the Tenderloin and working with the Fillmore. And it's a big thing. We need to explain to people why. Why are you doing this? Why do I need to answer all these questions? With that mistrust in them, it's a hard battle, man. I mean, but we have to be patient, deal with one person at a time. If it takes me 30 minutes to explain to a brother or sister or Latina why they need to fill out these forms and do this census, I'll give them 30 minutes, because maybe that's one more that we can add to the numbers. One is as important as anyone else.
I mean, the census would not be a successful operation without groups like Code Tenderloin and Imprint City helping us out. You know, the census is a federal operation, and the Census Bureau, sometimes it feels as though they don't even want to make sure that everyone gets counted, right? So it's been a big lift on the part of the state. It's been a big lift on the part of the city. But I think that most importantly, it's been a big lift on the part of some of those trusted messengers who are in the community, doing the work like Dell was saying, doing the work like Tyra was saying, in trying to communicate to people who they already know and interact with how important it is to get counted in the census. OSEA, the city department that I work for, gave out a couple $1 million in grants to over 30 nonprofit groups around San Francisco, including the A. Philip Randolph Institute, including Code Tenderloin, because we know that it has to be a grassroots campaign in order to make sure that the people who have the most distrust in government, who have the least feelings of goodwill towards this administration and this process called the census, to make sure that they want to participate. So I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, you know, I'm just some guy who works for the government. I'm the man. And so trying to make sure that the people who are doing the outreach are able to kind of cut through in a way that I can't.